He was a billionaire CEO with a penthouse view and no time for strangers. She was an 8-year-old girl on a frozen street corner, trying to sell her only teddy bear to save her home. When their worlds collided, one powerful man, one desperate child, it should have ended in a polite dismissal. Instead, it sparked a transformation no one saw coming. What began as a simple act of kindness would unravel grief, rebuild a family, and lead to the one thing he never knew he needed. This isn't just a story about giving, it's about being found. The first snow of December fell gently over the city, blanketing the cracked sidewalks and aging apartment buildings in a fragile layer of white. Downtown bustled as usual, shoppers darting from storefront to storefront, burdened with bags and gift boxes wrapped in holiday colors. Amid the clamor of the season, few noticed the little girl standing near the edge of Market and 7th, her boots too thin for the cold, her small fingers red from the chill. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, bundled in a patchy pink coat that didn't quite close over her sweater. Her wool hat was too big and kept slipping over her eyes, but she didn't fuss. She simply adjusted it quietly each time, returning her focus to the task at hand. At her feet sat a small cardboard box, worn at the edges, and inside it rested a single item, a well-loved teddy bear, its fur matted from years of cuddles, one button eye missing, the other slightly loose. "Only $5, the girl whispered, more to herself than to anyone passing by. "He's really brave. He protected me from monsters." People passed without hearing her. Some glanced, confused or curious, but they didn't stop. The girl stood straighter, adjusting the teddy bear's position so it looked presentable. She tried to smile, but it was hard with the wind biting her cheeks. Across the street, a sleek black SUV pulled up to the curb in front of the financial tower that loomed over the neighborhood. Out stepped a tall man in a dark wool coat, his frame imposing, his expression unreadable. Victor Langston, billionaire tech entrepreneur, co-founder of LangTech, and owner of nearly everything on that block. He was known for his sharp mind, sharper tongue, and zero tolerance for inefficiency. Most employees never saw him in person unless they were in trouble or being fired. Victor had no intention of being downtown that day. He preferred to work from his penthouse office uptown or remotely from his estate. But a last-minute investor meeting brought him to Langston Tower, and now he was focused on getting in and out as quickly as possible. He glanced at his watch, barked a few instructions into his phone, and strode toward the revolving doors until something made him stop. A voice, faint, fragile, drifting through the cold air. $5. He's very good at keeping you safe at night. Victor turned his head slightly, his eyes scanning the crowd. There, across the street, he saw her, the little girl with the big hat and the box. Something about her stopped him cold. She didn't look like she belonged in the sea of bustling adults. She looked like she had been placed there by mistake, like a character from another world. Without a word to his driver, Victor stepped off the curb and crossed the street. His shoes crunched against the fresh snow. The girl saw him approach and straightened again, her small hands nervously smoothing the bear's fur. "Would you like to buy him?" she asked, her voice hopeful but practiced. "He's really brave." Victor looked down at the bear, then back at her. "Why are you selling your toy?" he asked, his voice more curious than kind. The girl blinked. "So my mom can pay rent. We're late again. The man said we might have to leave if we don't pay this week." Victor stared at her. "How much is your rent?" The girl hesitated, as if unsure whether she was supposed to say. $750, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "But we already have some. We just need a little more. I thought maybe if someone bought Mr. Buttons—" Her voice trailed off, and she looked down at the bear with eyes full of sorrow. It was clear she didn't want to give him up, but need, real need, had a way of stealing even childhood from you. Victor reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his money clip. He counted out 10 $100 bills and knelt down in front of her. "I'll take Mr. Buttons," he said. The girl's eyes widened in shock. "But that's too much." Victor shrugged. "He sounds like he's worth it." Her hands trembled as she took the money. "You're sure?" "I'm sure," Victor said. She picked up the bear with trembling fingers and handed it to him. Her lower lip quivered as she did, but she tried to be brave. "Please take care of him. He doesn't like the dark." Victor nodded, unsure why his throat felt tight. "I'll make sure he's safe." She looked up at him, her eyes wide. "Thank you, mister." "What's your name?" he asked. "Emma." Victor nodded once more, then turned, Mr. Buttons tucked under one arm like a briefcase. He made it halfway across the street before stopping. Something pulled at him, something stronger than reason, stronger than his usual instinct to walk away from anything messy or emotional. He turned to glance back. Emma was gone. He looked up and down the sidewalk. Nothing. She had disappeared, swallowed by the crowd, or ducked into a nearby alley or building. For some reason, that made his chest tighten even more. Victor climbed into his SUV. "Take me home," he said. But as the vehicle pulled away, he stared at the bear in his lap. Its fur was threadbare in places, its one remaining eye looking up at him with silent expectation. Victor didn't understand why, but he couldn't stop thinking about her, about Emma. He didn't sleep that night, not because of deadlines or market trends or board meetings, but because of a little girl with sad eyes and a cardboard box, because he kept wondering what kind of world forced a child to sell her only comfort just to stay sheltered from the cold. The next morning, Victor changed his schedule. Canceled the strategy meeting, postponed the call with Tokyo. He had a new priority: find her. Victor had never been the kind of man to chase shadows, let alone act on feelings he didn't fully understand. Emotions to him were inefficiencies, things to be managed, shelved, or avoided altogether. But that morning, his mind refused to stay quiet. He kept seeing her, standing alone in the cold, her small body stiff with pride and hope, clutching nothing now but air where the teddy bear once was. A child shouldn't have to be that brave. His assistant, Marianne, stared at him across the desk, clearly trying to keep her expression neutral as he laid out his request. "You want me to find a child?" Victor nodded once. "Her name is Emma, about 8 years old, dark brown hair. She was selling a teddy bear outside Langston Tower yesterday afternoon, somewhere near Market and 7th. She said she needed money for rent. I gave her $1,000. Then she vanished." Marianne was silent for a moment. "Should I notify security? Pull camera footage?" "All of it. And check with nearby shelters. Schools, if you must. I want to know where she lives, who her mother is, what their situation is. Quietly, discreetly." "Of course," Marianne said, already scribbling notes. "And when we find them?" Victor hesitated. He didn't know the answer. He didn't know what he wanted. All he knew was that Emma had carved her way under his skin and refused to leave. "Just find her," he said. 2 days passed. Victor pretended to return to his routines, meetings, investor calls, product updates. But his mind was never truly in the room. At night he found himself staring at the bear on his bookshelf, Mr. Buttons, as Emma had called him. The bear looked ridiculous in his penthouse apartment, surrounded by sleek modern minimalism. And yet, it was the most valuable thing he owned. On the third morning, Marianne knocked and entered his office with a file in hand. Her expression was unreadable. "We found her." Victor's stomach twisted. "Where?" Marianne handed over the folder. "She lives in a walk-up in the Old Briar District, apartment 4C. Her mother's name is Laura Price, formerly employed at Fairview Dental as a receptionist. Let go 3 months ago after the clinic closed due to budget cuts. No family in state, late on rent for 2 months. They've received 2 eviction notices." Victor stared at the folder. "And Emma?" "She's enrolled at Briarwood Elementary, 2nd grade. Good student. Perfect attendance until about 3 weeks ago. Since then, it's been spotty. Principal says they've tried reaching out to the mother, but didn't get a response. Victor clenched his jaw. And the landlord? Slumlord, more like. Multiple code violations on record. He's been fined before. Looks like he's hoping to evict low-income tenants so he can sell the building. He's the one who threatened eviction by the end of this week. Victor stood. Get the car. 10 minutes later, he was sitting in the back of his SUV again, staring out at the city as it blurred past. The snow had turned slushy, the sidewalks dark with grime, but he barely noticed. When the car pulled up in front of the building, Victor felt an unfamiliar tightness in his chest. It was the kind of place people pretended not to see. Windows boarded with plastic sheets, cracked steps leading up to a rusting door, and a broken buzzer that someone had taped over with a note, "Knock hard." He knocked. After a moment, the door opened slightly. A woman stood behind it, thin, with tired eyes and hair pulled into a messy bun. She wore a faded sweatshirt and threadbare leggings, and the worry in her eyes was palpable. "Yes?" she asked cautiously. "Laura Price?" "Yes. Who are you?" "My name is Victor Langston." He waited for recognition. It didn't come. That somehow felt refreshing. "I met your daughter, Emma, a few days ago. She was selling a teddy bear downtown." Laura's face paled. "Oh, God, I told her not to do that. She was supposed to stay inside. I didn't know she—" "It's okay," Victor said quickly. "She wasn't in any danger. I just wanted to check on her. On both of you." Laura hesitated. "Why?" Victor was silent for a moment. "Because no child should have to sell her teddy bear to keep a roof over her head." Laura's shoulders sagged. She opened the door wider. "You'd better come in." The apartment was small, one bedroom, a kitchenette, and a living area that doubled as Emma's sleeping space. The heat barely worked, and a small space heater buzzed in the corner. On the counter, a box of instant noodles sat open, along with a stack of overdue bills. Emma sat cross-legged on a second-hand sofa, coloring in a notebook. When she looked up and saw Victor, her eyes went wide. "Mr. Buttons!" she cried, jumping up. Victor smiled. "He's safe. I left him at home." Emma ran over, then hesitated. She glanced at her mother, unsure. "It's okay, sweetie," Laura said, brushing a hand over her daughter's hair. "This is the nice man you told me about." Emma nodded solemnly. "Did he help you?" Victor looked between them. "That's why I'm here?" Laura looked wary. "Listen, I appreciate what you did. Truly. That money helped me pay enough to buy us time. But we'll be okay. I'm interviewing for jobs. And we'll figure something out." Victor's brow furrowed. "That's not good enough." Laura's eyes narrowed slightly. "Excuse me. I'm not here to make a donation. I don't do handouts. But I do recognize potential. Your daughter is brilliant, brave, and she shouldn't be growing up like this." "And what are you suggesting?" Laura asked, arms crossed. "I'm suggesting you let me help, not just money, a job, a place to live, school support for Emma, permanently." Laura gaped at him. Victor continued, "Come work for Langtech. We have several administrative positions open. I'll personally oversee your onboarding. You'll have benefits, medical coverage, a livable salary, and housing. I'll put you both in one of my corporate apartments, rent-free for as long as you need it." Emma looked confused. "What does onboarding mean?" Victor smiled. "It means your mom gets a fresh start, and you get to go back to school, maybe even get Mr. Buttons back." Laura sat down heavily. Why would you do this?" Victor hesitated, then looked down at Emma. "Because once, a long time ago, I lost someone I loved, a little boy not much older than your daughter. And when I saw Emma, I saw a chance to do something I didn't do then, something that mattered." Laura's eyes filled. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Victor said quietly. The silence hung for a beat. Then Emma stepped forward and wrapped her small arms around his waist. Victor froze. Then slowly he rested a hand on her back. Laura stood, voice trembling. "Okay, we'll try." Victor nodded, something in his chest loosening for the first time in years. This wasn't charity. This was restoration, and it was only the beginning. Moving day came faster than any of them expected. Less than 48 hours after Laura said yes, Victor's team had mobilized like a military operation. The small apartment on the fourth floor of that run-down building was soon swarmed with quiet, efficient professionals who packed everything into labeled boxes, what little there was, and arranged for a discreet move to a clean, modern two-bedroom apartment in the executive housing units Victor kept for out-of-town staff. The new apartment overlooked the park with a wide balcony and sunlight that streamed through oversized windows. Emma had her own room now. Her bed was brand new, covered in a soft lilac comforter with matching pillows, and beside it, carefully placed as if he'd always belonged there, sat Mr. Buttons. When Emma saw him, she squealed with delight, hugging the bear tightly and whispering to him like an old friend returned from war. Victor stood back, watching silently as Emma twirled in the middle of her new room, her arms outstretched, her laughter ringing like bells. Laura approached him quietly, a paper coffee cup in her hands. "You did all this in 2 days." Victor shrugged. "Efficiency is a habit." "It's incredible," she said, her voice softer. "This is the first time Emma's ever had her own room." "She deserves it," Victor said simply. They stood in silence for a moment, watching Emma place Mr. Buttons on her pillow, carefully tucking the blanket around him. Then Laura turned to Victor. "About the job, I meant what I said," he interrupted gently. "You're on the Lang Tech Administrative Support Team now. You'll start next Monday. Your hours are flexible, so you can manage Emma's school schedule and your own needs." Laura stared at him, blinking. "You really mean this to be long-term?" "I don't do anything halfway," he said, "and I've already spoken to the principal at Briarwood. Emma's enrollment is secured. Uniforms and supplies have been delivered. Her attendance starts tomorrow." Laura blinked again. "You've done more for us in a week than anyone has in our entire lives." Victor's eyes softened. "Sometimes people need someone to see them." A flicker of emotion crossed Laura's face. "Thank you. I don't even know how to begin repaying you." Victor looked down at Emma, now curling up on her bed with Mr. Buttons, talking softly to him about her favorite colors and what she'd name her new goldfish if she ever got one. "You already have, huh?" he said. For the next few weeks, life settled into a rhythm that was foreign to Victor, but oddly satisfying. Laura reported for work on time every day, professional and quietly competent, learning quickly and asking smart questions. Emma flourished at Briarwood, quickly becoming a favorite among her teachers for her curiosity and kindness. Her grades soared, and her drawings, once always in black and white, were now filled with color. Victor found himself altering his routine more and more. He started taking breakfast later, just so he could bump into Laura on her way out. He passed by Emma's school at dismissal time just to make sure everything looked right. Sometimes he even picked her up himself, and she'd chatter in the car all the way back, telling him about fractions or spelling bees or what she thought of the cafeteria's suspicious meatballs. Mrs. Winters, his longtime housekeeper, began noticing the change too. "You smile more now," she said one evening, matter-of-factly. Victor looked up from his tablet. "I always smile." Mrs. Winters raised an eyebrow. "No, sir, you didn't." He didn't argue. It was true. He was smiling more. He was also sleeping better. For years, Victor's nights were restless, haunted by the silence of his empty home, the weight of work, and memories he kept locked tight in the vault of his heart. Now, the silence was gone. It had been replaced with the hum of life, footsteps from the apartment below, Emma's voice echoing in his head, Laura's laughter ringing in his ears long after they parted ways. One Friday afternoon, as the sun dipped low over the city skyline, Victor pulled up in front of the school. Emma came bursting out the front doors, her backpack bouncing. "Mr. Victor!" she called, waving wildly. He stepped out of the car and opened the door for her. How was your day? Awesome! I got a gold star on my reading quiz. And guess what? What? They picked me to be the flower girl for the school's winter assembly. Victor blinked. That's quite the honor, Emma beamed. I get to wear a fancy dress and walk down the aisle in the auditorium and throw glitter petals. He smiled at her excitement. Sounds like a red carpet event. She giggled. Will you come? Victor hesitated. Would you like me to? Emma didn't even pause. You're family now. Of course you should come. Family. The word hit him like a jolt to the chest. But not in a bad way. In the way that made his heart ache a little. An old, familiar ache tied to memories of what he'd lost. His brother's child, the accident, the funeral he hadn't been able to attend because of the media storm, the guilt that never faded. And now, this child, this wide-eyed girl, saw him as part of her world. He nodded slowly. Then I'll be there. Back at the apartment, Laura was cooking dinner when they walked in. The kitchen smelled of garlic and onions and something warm and comforting. Victor never stayed long, just long enough to drop Emma off, but that night she turned and smiled at him over her shoulder. You're staying for dinner. It wasn't a question. Victor opened his mouth to argue, but he didn't. He sat at the counter instead and watched Laura move around the kitchen like she belonged there, like they all did. Later that evening, Emma fell asleep on the sofa, curled up with Mr. Buttons and a blanket. Victor lifted her gently, carried her to her bed, and tucked her in. Laura stood in the doorway, arms crossed over her chest. You're good with her, she said softly. Victor shrugged. She's easy to love. Laura smiled. I think she's bringing out the part of you that used to be. The part I lost? Victor asked. No, she said, her voice full of certainty. The part you buried. He didn't respond, but his eyes never left hers. They stood in silence for a long moment. Then she turned and walked toward the kitchen to clean up. Victor lingered, staring at the soft rise and fall of Emma's chest as she slept. Mr. Buttons cradled tightly in her arms. This wasn't how he planned his life. It was better. The winter assembly arrived faster than expected. Briarwood Elementary transformed its modest auditorium into a snow-dusted wonderland, complete with paper snowflakes dangling from the ceiling, cardboard fireplaces painted by the art club, and a backdrop mural of a forest glowing with faux moonlight. Parents filed in early, bundled in coats and scarves, murmuring with anticipation as the string quartet of fifth graders struggled to tune their instruments. Victor Langston arrived 15 minutes early, not because he was nervous, he told himself, but because Emma had made him promise he wouldn't miss a second. He took a seat near the middle row, reserved by Laura, with a sticky note labeled for Mr. Victor, VIP. The note had a tiny heart drawn in one corner. He tucked it into his coat pocket, straightened his cuffs, and waited. The lights dimmed. The first graders sang about snowmen and mittens. The second graders put on a short play about woodland animals, learning the meaning of sharing. Victor clapped at all the right moments, but his eyes remained fixed on the left side of the stage where the flower girl would soon appear. And then the curtains parted again, and there she was. Emma stepped delicately into the spotlight, wearing a white dress that sparkled like fresh snow. Her brown hair had been curled, her cheeks flushed with excitement. She carried a small silver basket filled with glitter petals, which she tossed carefully as she walked down the center aisle of the auditorium. She didn't see Victor at first, too focused on placing each handful of petals just right. But as she neared the front, her eyes flicked up and found him. Her whole face lit up. Victor smiled, the real kind that creased his cheeks and softened his usually stern eyes. After the performance, families gathered in the school gym for cookies and hot cocoa. Victor waited in the hallway, unsure if he should intrude, but Emma found him anyway. "You came," she said, launching herself at him. He caught her with practiced ease. "You were perfect," she beamed. "Did you see the glitter throw? I practiced it all morning." "Spot on," he said, brushing a bit of sparkle from her hair. Laura appeared moments later, laughing as she approached. I think she got half the glitter in her shoes. I got most of it in the principal's lap, Emma added proudly. Laura shook her head. You did wonderfully, sweetheart. Go grab a cookie, okay? Emma dashed off. Victor watched her go, then turned to Laura. She's thriving. She is, Laura agreed. And so am I. Victor looked at her carefully. She wore a soft navy sweater, her hair loose for once, cascading over her shoulders. She looked at peace, happy even. I've never thanked you properly, she said, voice low. What you did, it wasn't just money or a place to stay. You gave us a new start. You changed the trajectory of Emma's life, of mine. Victor looked down at the cocoa in his hand, then back at her. She changed mine, too. They were quiet a moment, the crowd buzzing around them. Then Laura tilted her head slightly. Will you walk us home? The air outside was brisk, snowflakes swirling gently. Emma skipped ahead, humming a holiday tune, her glitter basket swinging from her arm. Victor and Laura walked side by side. She's going to want you at everything now, Laura said. I don't mind, he replied. She already sees you as part of our family. Victor looked at her. What about you? Laura met his eyes. I think maybe I started seeing you that way long before I admitted it. Victor stopped walking. The snow fell in soft flurries, collecting on their shoulders. Laura, I know, she said. It's complicated, but it doesn't have to be. I've spent years avoiding attachment. After I lost my nephew, I told myself it wasn't worth the risk, she nodded. And I spent years telling myself I didn't need anyone. He reached for her hand. I want to be part of your life, he said. Not just the man who fixed a situation. I want to be here, with you, with Emma, every day. Laura squeezed his hand. Then stay. At the apartment, Emma had already kicked off her shoes and flopped onto the couch. Movie night? She asked. Victor and Laura exchanged a glance. Movie night, they said in unison. They watched Home Alone on the couch, Emma nestled between them, clutching Mr. Buttons as the movie played. At one point, she looked up at them and said sleepily, I don't ever want this to change. Victor kissed the top of her head. Me neither. Time passed. Winter turned to spring, then summer. Laura excelled at work, rising quickly within Lang Tech's administration team. Emma graduated to 3rd grade with honors, her art projects frequently taped up in Victor's office. The apartment stayed home for now, though Victor made quiet preparations for something more permanent. One warm June afternoon, Victor took them both to a small house on a tree-lined street. It had a white porch, a swing out front, and a backyard just big enough for a garden. Why are we here? Emma asked, tilting her head. Victor pulled out a set of keys and handed them to Laura. Because it's ours, if you want it. Laura stared at him, eyes filling. I wanted to give you a place where you could plant roots, he said, where Emma can grow up without wondering what comes next. Emma squealed. Can I pick my room? Victor laughed. Only if I get to help? The house became home faster than any of them expected. Emma painted her walls lavender, planted sunflowers with Laura, and convinced Victor to let her adopt a kitten, who she named Glitter. There were dinners on the porch, game nights, school recitals, and lazy Sundays spent watching cartoons. Slowly, a quiet, beautiful life took shape. And then, one crisp September morning, as the sun warmed the edges of the porch, Victor knelt on one knee with a small velvet box in hand. Laura gasped. Emma, sitting on the swing, dropped her juice box. Will you marry me? Victor asked simply. Will you let me stay forever? Tears welled in Laura's eyes as she nodded. Yes. Emma threw her arms around them both. Does this mean I can call you Dad now? Victor pulled her close. Only if you mean it. I do, she whispered. They were married that spring, in the backyard under a canopy of white blossoms, with Emma as the flower girl once again, this time without glitter. Mr. Buttons sat in a place of honor on the front bench, a quiet reminder of the day their story began. Victor Langston, once the loneliest man in the tallest building, now lived in a house filled with laughter, art projects, sticky fingerprints, and love. And every night, as Emma drifted off to sleep, Mr. Buttons tucked under her arm, she whispered to him, "We're safe now. He kept his promise." And Victor did. He always would. The days grew longer, golden sun spilling through the trees that lined their quiet neighborhood. The scent of fresh grass drifted on warm breezes, and Emma's laughter, unrestrained and frequent, had become part of the daily soundtrack. Mornings were busy, filled with cereal bowls, forgotten backpacks, and Victor insisting on tying Emma's shoelaces while pretending he didn't secretly enjoy it. Evenings were slower, softer. Dinner at the kitchen table, stories about school, discussions about planets and science projects, and always Mr. Buttons present, seated in a little plush chair Victor had custom-made and installed in Emma's room. Despite the comfort they now enjoyed, Victor couldn't forget how it all began. The image of Emma standing on a frozen sidewalk, trying to sell the one thing she loved most, never left him. It lived in the back of his mind like a cautionary ghost, whispering of all the ways the world could still fall apart. And so he worked, quietly, behind the scenes, to ensure it wouldn't. He set up a trust for Emma, not something massive and indulgent, but enough to cover any future hardship. He ensured Laura's position at Langtech would lead to upward mobility, mentoring her personally as she transitioned into project coordination. She took it all in stride, grateful, driven, but never reliant. That Victor respected most of all. And yet, in the quiet moments, when Emma had gone to bed and the dishes were drying on the rack, Victor sometimes found himself lingering near Laura. They would sit with their mugs of tea on the back steps, shoulder to shoulder, saying very little. The silence between them had grown warm, familiar, like an unspoken vow that didn't need words anymore. One such night Laura glanced at him, then at the stars overhead. "She talks about you constantly at school," she said. Victor raised an eyebrow. "Is that good or bad?" "She told her class you used to be a king who lived in a castle but gave it up to live in a normal house with his new family." Victor chuckled. "I don't remember abdicating my throne." "She said you traded it for pancakes and soccer games." "She's not wrong." Laura turned her head. "You really like this life." "I do." She hesitated, then said, "Do you ever miss the other one? The boardrooms, the exclusive retreats, the jet-setting?" Victor looked at her for a long time, sometimes for about 5 minutes. "Then I see Emma run through the sprinkler in our backyard, or hear you humming while folding laundry, and I remember what I used to think mattered. Doesn't." Laura smiled, eyes reflective in the moonlight. "I was scared, you know, letting you in. I thought it was a mistake. Too much. Too fast." "I know. But I look at you now and wonder how we ever lived without you." Victor reached for her hand and held it. "I feel the same." He squeezed gently. "But there's one thing I've been waiting for." "What's that?" He looked into her eyes. "The day she calls me Dad." Laura's smile faltered, but not from reluctance. Her voice softened, choked with emotion. "She's been calling you that in her drawings for weeks." Victor blinked. "She showed me one the other night. Stick figures. You, her, me, Mr. Buttons, the house. And underneath she wrote, 'My family. Mommy, Daddy, me, and Mr. B.'" He couldn't speak. His throat tightened too fast, too sharp. Laura leaned in and rested her head on his shoulder. "She's just waiting for you to be ready." Victor exhaled slowly. "Then maybe I'll be ready soon." They sat in silence, letting that truth settle between them. The stars above glimmered like old stories waiting to be rewritten. The next morning, Emma stormed into the living room wearing her backpack and sneakers on the wrong feet. Mr. B says we should go to the zoo today. Victor looked over his coffee mug. It's a school day. But it's field trip day and they're going to the zoo. Oh, that we can manage. He stood, adjusted her sneakers, and handed her the lunchbox Laura had prepped. Then he knelt, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. You know, he said, I've been thinking about something. What? I was wondering, would it be okay if you started calling me Dad? Emma tilted her head, as if this were the most obvious thing in the world. I already do, she whispered. In my heart. Victor closed his eyes for just a second, then pulled her into a hug. Good, he said. That's where it matters most. As they walked out the door that morning, Emma bouncing ahead, Mr. Buttons zipped in her backpack, and Laura laughing as she locked the house behind them, Victor realized something profound. He had built his life on profits and projections, corner offices, and calculated risks. But none of that had prepared him for the extraordinary return of investing in two lives that simply needed to be seen, needed to be chosen, and he had chosen them. Every day he would choose them again, and they had chosen him too, even Mr. Buttons. Autumn arrived on a breeze, brushing amber leaves from the trees lining their quiet street. The garden Laura had planted behind the house bloomed with marigolds and late sunflowers, and Emma brought home a construction paper turkey with feathers labeled, Things I'm Thankful For. On one, in crooked letters, was written, My Dad Who Found Me. Victor had stared at it for a long time. He kept it in a drawer in his office, folded gently beside the drawing Laura had mentioned, the one with the stick figures labeled Mommy, Daddy, me, and Mr. B. He never said a word about it, but sometimes, during late meetings when the stress mounted, he opened the drawer and looked at it. Not for inspiration, for grounding, for truth. The rhythm of their lives had become so natural, so real, that it surprised him when people from his past reappeared and didn't recognize the man he'd become. Like the day his executive assistant buzzed him about an unscheduled visitor. It's Garrett Crane, she said carefully. Victor frowned. Garrett was a fellow billionaire, a friend once. Back when money was a sport and ego a weapon. They hadn't spoken in almost a year. Send him in, Victor said. Garrett swept into the office like a gale, designer suit, slicked back hair, exuding the confident entitlement of a man who'd never had to worry about anything outside quarterly performance. Victor Langston, the recluse returns à Solker, he said with a grin. You've been dodging charity galas and yacht parties. What gives? You join a monastery? Victor stood, offered a handshake. Not quite. Garrett sat without being asked, immediately taking in the subtle changes around the office. Photos now adorned the shelves. Emma, with ice cream on her nose. Laura holding a tomato from their garden. A small, worn teddy bear sitting like a sentry near Victor's window. Garrett laughed, pointing. What's with the bear? You go soft on me? Victor smiled faintly. That bear changed my life. Garrett leaned back, clearly trying to calculate whether Victor was joking. When he realized he wasn't, his tone shifted. You serious? Very. Garrett frowned. I heard rumors that you moved out of the penthouse, that you're living in the suburbs. Victor didn't flinch. I am. Why? You were the king of the skyline. Victor looked him dead in the eye. Because a little girl was selling her teddy bear to help her mom pay rent, and I realized there's more to life than being king of anything. For the first time, Garrett had no comeback. Victor continued. Her name is Emma. She's my daughter now. Not by blood, but by something better. Choice. Garrett stood slowly, pushing his chair back. You're really serious about this? I've never been more serious about anything. Garrett let out a long breath. Well, damn. He extended a hand again. Guess I'll see you at the school bake sale then. Victor smirked. Bring your checkbook. After Garrett left, Victor walked to the window and looked out over the city. The glass and steel skyline had once represented everything he strived for. Now it simply marked where he'd been, not where he was going. Because where he was going, where they were going, was somewhere real. That evening, he arrived home to find Emma on the floor of the living room constructing a cardboard rocket ship for Mr. Buttons. "We're flying to Saturn tonight," she announced. Victor knelt beside her. "What's on Saturn?" "Peace and quiet," she whispered conspiratorially. "And cookies." "Sounds like my kind of place." Laura stepped out of the kitchen, drying her hands. "Don't forget to pack Mr. B's space snacks." Victor stood, crossing the room to her, and kissed her temple. "How was work?" "Good. The new team's coming together. I even got a compliment from Darren in compliance." "That's rare. Did you frame it?" "I considered it." She looked up at him, amused. "You seem lighter?" Garrett stopped by the office. "Oh, boy. He asked about Mr. Buttons." Laura laughed. "What did you tell him?" "That I'm a dad now." Laura blinked. "You said that?" "Out loud. On purpose." She smiled, quiet and proud. "You really are." He nodded. "I just didn't know how badly I needed to be." The next weekend they attended a fall festival at Emma's school. Laura volunteered at the bake sale booth, and Victor found himself running the apple bobbing station, a job he'd never imagined himself doing in any version of his past life. Emma ran the pumpkin ring toss, directing second graders with the intensity of a field general. "Nice form," she called out to a boy hurling plastic rings. "But keep your elbow in." A fellow parent approached Victor during a lull. "You Emma's dad?" Victor turned. "I am." "She's great. My daughter talks about her all the time." "Thank you." The man held out a hand. "Josh, PTO co-chair. You coming to the meeting next week?" Victor shook his hand. "I wouldn't miss it." Later that evening, while unpacking fall decorations in the garage, Victor found a dusty plastic storage bin labeled Holiday. When he opened it, inside was a small artificial tree, a string of tangled lights, and a handful of mismatched ornaments. "Mom and I never had much," Laura explained, stepping into the garage and noticing what he'd found. "But every year, she insisted on putting up a tree, even when we couldn't afford gifts, just the tree, and one new ornament each year." Victor picked up a glass snowflake with the year 2001 etched in gold. "Emma helped me make a new one every year after she was born. She's already talking about what ours will be this year." Victor ran a thumb over the smooth edge of the ornament. "I was thinking," he said, "maybe we start a new tree this year, with our ornaments." Together, Laura's eyes softened. "I'd love that." They spent the next few weekends preparing. Victor took Emma to pick out a real tree, tall enough to touch the ceiling. They covered it in twinkling lights, ornaments old and new, and topped it with a paper angel Emma had made in art class. Mr. Buttons wore a Santa hat and stood guard beneath the tree. On Christmas Eve, they invited a few neighbors over. Teachers, parents from school, even Mrs. Winters. The house buzzed with music and warmth. Emma passed out homemade cookies, wearing her favorite red dress and a gold necklace Victor had surprised her with that morning. After the guests had gone and the house quieted, the three of them sat on the couch, wrapped in blankets, cocoa in hand. Emma curled between them, Mr. Buttons clutched tightly. "Do you think Santa knows where our house is now?" she asked sleepily. Victor brushed a curl from her forehead. "I think Santa knows exactly where you are." "Good," she murmured, "because I already have everything I want." Victor looked at Laura. She smiled. "So do I," he whispered. And as the snow began to fall gently outside, frosting the porch and garden in soft white, Victor Langston, once the loneliest man in the tallest tower, closed his eyes, surrounded by love, warmth, and the one gift he never expected to find: a family. New Year's Eve arrived with little fanfare and none of the extravagance Victor Langston's past self would have planned. No rooftop galas, no fireworks over the harbor, no orchestra playing in some crystalline ballroom filled with champagne flutes and murmuring investors. This year there was pizza on the living room floor, a nest of blankets, a countdown on an old television, and three people, Victor, Laura, and Emma, curled together like they had always been meant to fit in the same frame. Emma had fallen asleep before the ball dropped, her arms wrapped tightly around Mr. Button's. Her breathing was slow and even, her cheek pressed against Laura's leg, while Victor lay on his side nearby, head resting on one hand as he watched the flicker of lights dance across the screen. "She tried so hard to stay awake," Laura whispered, smiling as she stroked her daughter's hair. "She made it to 10:30, Victor said. "That's a record." Laura laughed softly, her hand brushing against Victor's. Neither moved away. The room was dim, the only light coming from the tree still glowing softly in the corner, casting shadows on the walls and catching the glint of tinsel Emma had flung with no coordination but plenty of joy. Victor couldn't stop looking at the room. The pictures on the wall, the traces of Emma's crayon drawings on the edge of the coffee table, the scent of cinnamon still clinging to the air. It felt lived in, real. "Do you remember your last New Year's Eve?" Laura asked him gently, not to pry, but because she wanted to know all the pieces of him. Victor exhaled through his nose, not answering for a long moment. "I was in Tokyo," he said finally. "At a silent dinner, 12 courses, not a single word spoken for the entire 3 hours. Everyone there was someone, bankers, tech founders, foreign ministers. I flew home alone, didn't sleep for 2 days after." Laura's brow furrowed. "Why not?" "I think because I realized I'd built an empire to escape something I couldn't outrun, and when I stopped moving, the silence caught up." He looked over at Emma, her soft snores now barely audible. "And now?" Laura asked. Victor glanced at her. "Now I hope the silence never comes back." She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. They stayed that way until the clock struck midnight and fireworks cracked faintly in the distance. Neither stirred, neither spoke. They didn't need to. January brought new routines. Emma joined the school science club and came home nearly every day covered in glitter or baking soda or mysterious goo she insisted was totally non-toxic. Laura returned to work after the holiday break with renewed focus. And Victor? He found himself letting go of old habits more and more. He didn't check stock prices before breakfast anymore. He didn't spend Sunday evenings reviewing financial forecasts. He didn't take calls after 6 o'clock unless the world was literally on fire, and even then, only after Emma's bedtime story. Instead, he started cooking. It began with pancakes, then spaghetti, then a disastrous attempt at meatloaf that Emma declared brave and Laura politely called experimental. But he kept at it, not because he had to, because it was one more way to be there, present, real, human. One evening, as he stood in the kitchen wearing a comically oversized apron that read, "Kiss the Chef" in faded red, Laura leaned against the doorway, arms crossed and smiling. "You know you don't have to do this, right?" Victor glanced over his shoulder. "Cook dinner? Be the perfect everything. The perfect dad, the perfect partner. We love you already." He paused, spatula in hand. "I'm not trying to be perfect," he said. "I'm trying to be consistent." Laura stepped into the kitchen, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind. "You already are." In February, a cold snap swept the city. Pipes froze. Sidewalks glittered with black ice. And one morning, Emma fell ill. It started with a cough, then chills, then fever. Victor took her to the pediatrician the moment her forehead spiked past 101. He waited in the small exam room, pacing, while Emma curled on the table under a blanket, Mr. Buttons cradled in her arms. "It's just the flu," the doctor said after a thorough exam. "Lots of fluids. Rest. Keep her bundled up. She'll bounce back." Victor exhaled, tension draining from his shoulders. Laura, who had joined them straight from work, looked equally relieved. But for 3 days, Emma was weak, shivering, too tired even to complain. Victor slept on the floor of her bedroom each night, refusing to leave her side. He held her hand when she whimpered in her sleep. He reheated soup at all hours, fetched tissues, measured medicine, and when she finally began to stir on day 4, her voice a whisper, her eyes sleepy but alert, she looked at him and said, "Thanks, Dad." Victor had heard her call him that before, but this time it felt different. It was laced with trust. It was laced with knowing that he would always be there. That night, after Emma had fallen back into a healing sleep, Victor stepped into the hallway and found Laura waiting. "She asked for you when I went in earlier," she said softly. "Not me. You." Victor leaned back against the wall, running a hand over his face. "I didn't know it would feel like this." "Like what?" "Like everything I missed somehow came back. Like I'm getting another chance I don't deserve." Laura stepped closer, took his face in both her hands. "You don't have to deserve love, Victor. You just have to show up for it." "I will," he said quietly. "Every day, for both of you." She kissed him then, right there in the hallway outside their daughter's room. A kiss not of urgency or passion, but of deep anchoring certainty. Spring returned slowly. Buds on trees, muddy boots, chalk drawings on the sidewalk. Emma's health restored completely, and her energy returned in full force. She began writing stories, elaborate tales about bears that fought pirates and queens who ruled with kindness. In every one, there was always a father character, a quiet hero who listened more than he spoke and always showed up. Victor read every story she wrote, start to finish, regardless of how long or winding, because each one was a mirror, and in every reflection he saw the man he had become, the man she believed him to be, and for the first time in his life, Victor Langston believed in that man too. By May, Victor had fully immersed himself in a life he hadn't planned for, but one he couldn't imagine letting go of. Every weekend was packed. Soccer games on Saturdays, pancake breakfasts on Sundays, followed by long, meandering walks through the botanical gardens where Emma insisted every flower had a name and personality. Victor knew the names now, not just of the roses or lilies, but of the class pets, the lunch ladies, the playground aides. He knew who sat next to Emma in reading group and who had stolen her glue stick once and later apologized with a crayon drawing of a dolphin. He wasn't just in her world, he was part of it. And more, Laura let herself lean into that truth too. She stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the kindness to vanish, for the ground beneath them to shake again, because it didn't. It only grew more solid, steadier. One afternoon, while Emma was at a birthday party, Victor and Laura sat beneath the pergola in their backyard, sharing a pitcher of lemonade and a plate of cheese and crackers. Laura tapped her glass gently. "Do you remember what you were doing 1 year ago today?" Victor thought for a moment. "I think I was firing a CFO and preparing for a board meeting in Zurich." Laura raised an eyebrow. "And today?" "I'm planning to install a treehouse." She laughed, tipping her head back. "I like this timeline." "I prefer it," he admitted. A silence settled, but it was the kind they both liked. Familiar, easy. "I've been thinking," Laura said after a while, her voice quiet. "Emma's birthday is in 2 months. 10 years old. Double digits." Victor smiled. "I know. I already have a dozen ideas for what to get her." "I know you do, but I was wondering, would you want to do something more permanent? Something that tells her exactly who she is to you?" Victor looked at her, the warmth from the sun suddenly overwhelmed by something far more powerful spreading in his chest. "Like what?" Laura reached into her purse and pulled out a folded document. It was already filled out, Emma's birth certificate application for a legal name change, her last name rewritten as Langston. "I talked to her about it," Laura said softly. "I told her she could think about it as long as she needed, but she said she didn't need time. She already feels like your daughter. She said she wants to make it official." Victor stared at the paper. A name. It was just a name, and yet it meant everything. Laura touched his hand. She's already yours, in every way that counts. This just seals it." He nodded slowly, his throat too tight for words. "I'll sign it," he finally managed. They submitted the papers the next day. No fanfare, no announcement, just a quiet formality that made something unspoken feel real. The morning the paperwork was finalized, a manila envelope arrived at their door. Victor opened it slowly and pulled out a fresh birth certificate. Emma Price Langston. It didn't just look right, it felt right. That evening, they framed it and placed it beside a photo of the three of them in the living room. Emma didn't say much when she saw it. She simply walked over, traced her finger along her new last name, and hugged both of them at once. "I was always a Langston," she whispered. "We just had to catch the papers up." Victor kissed the top of her head. Exactly right. The news spread quietly through the neighborhood. Some people blinked at the idea, a billionaire adopting the daughter of a once struggling single mother, but no one questioned it, because everyone could see it. In the way Emma lit up when Victor entered a room, in the way Laura smiled when she watched them together, in the way the house, once just a shell of possibility, had become a home filled with music, with footprints, with life. Emma started calling him Dad full-time. No hesitation, no hyphen, just Dad. At school events, other children asked if he was her real dad. "Yes," Emma always said, "he's the realest person I know." One afternoon in June, Victor returned from a meeting to find Laura waiting for him in the garden. She held a folded piece of paper in one hand and a strange, unreadable expression on her face. "What's this?" he asked, taking the paper. "It's a letter from the landlord at my old building, the one from before we met." Victor froze. What does he want? "He says the building's being torn down. A developer bought it. They're leveling the whole block." Victor looked at her, searching for any trace of sadness. Laura's eyes held a strange clarity. "He sent a letter to everyone who ever lived there, said we could come collect anything left behind. Memories, photos, furniture, whatever." Victor held her hand. "Do you want to go?" She hesitated. Then she nodded. 2 days later, they drove there together. The building looked even worse than Victor remembered. Shutters hung loose, graffiti covered the walls, the steps sagged in the middle. Laura stared at it quietly for a long time. "I raised her here," she murmured. "She learned to walk on that chipped tile. We used to sit by the radiator and pretend it was a fireplace." Victor said nothing. He simply stood beside her, present, solid. They went upstairs, what was left of it, and retrieved a box she'd forgotten, old baby clothes, a few drawings, a cracked picture frame that had once held a photo of Laura and her mother, Emma's first pacifier tucked inside a Ziploc, a few notebooks, one labeled "Ideas for a Better Life." Victor thumbed through it later that night, after Emma had gone to bed. Inside, Laura had written things like, "Stable job with benefits," "A backyard for Emma," "Someone who cares about her when I can't be there," "A teddy bear that doesn't have to be sold to keep the lights on," "Peace." He closed the notebook and set it beside the framed certificate. Everything on the list had come true. Summer settled in with heat waves and ice cream trucks, sunburned noses, and lazy afternoons. Victor took Fridays off for the first time in his life. He spent them chasing Emma through sprinklers, helping her build a lemonade stand, and learning that happiness didn't come from achievement. It came from presence. On one of those Fridays, as they sat on a blanket in the yard, Laura reached into her purse and pulled out a small velvet box. Victor raised an eyebrow. "I didn't think it was my birthday." "It's not," she said. "It's just something I wanted to give you." Inside the box was a keychain. On one side was an engraving, "Found family is forever." On the other side, a tiny etched image of Mr. Buttons. Victor stared at it for a long moment before closing the box carefully. "You changed everything," he said, voice low. "You and Emma." Laura rested her head on his shoulder. "And you made us believe it was safe to hope again." They sat in silence, the summer wind rustling the trees around them, their hands entwined, the little velvet box between them, a symbol of what had been lost, what had been found, and the future they were now building together. The rhythm of life continued to unfold, unbroken and fluid, each day blending into the next like brushstrokes on a canvas. Neither Victor nor Laura had dared imagine just 1 year before. Summer deepened, school let out, and Emma's days became filled with sidewalk chalk art, backyard gardening with Laura, and coding tutorials with Victor that always ended with laughter when she inevitably programmed the computer to meow at every keystroke. Victor sat in the home office one afternoon, Emma perched beside him with her legs crossed on the floor and Mr. Buttons resting on her lap. She was scribbling designs for what she called Dad's Dream House of Robots, a blueprint that involved a chocolate dispensing ceiling, a retractable hammock, and a surveillance drone that only responded to Emma's voice. Victor, who once negotiated billion-dollar acquisitions without blinking, was now fully invested in whether or not the robot dog she designed could also do homework. Laura stood at the doorway holding 2 glasses of lemonade, watching the two of them with a mixture of wonder and quiet affection. "You two building Skynet?" she asked, handing Victor a glass. Emma grinned. "Nope, something better. Dadnet." Victor laughed. "It's a little less threatening, so far." When Emma skipped off to take her invention blueprints to the fridge for display, Laura walked behind Victor's chair and wrapped her arms around his shoulders. He reached up to take her hand without needing to turn around. "I was thinking," she said, resting her chin gently on his head, "about writing again." Victor turned his head toward her. "Your stories?" "My life. I used to write little essays about being a mom, about surviving, about dreaming when it hurt too much to breathe." Victor slid his hand into hers. "You should." "Do you think anyone would care?" "I do, because I care." She smiled. "Then maybe I'll start tonight." And she did. She wrote while Emma painted glitter trees on the porch and Victor grilled dinner with instructions from YouTube. She wrote about the old apartment, about fear, about faith, about a man who bought a teddy bear for too much money and got a family in return. Victor read the first entry late that night while Laura slept beside him and Emma dreamed across the hall. It was raw and real and powerful, the kind of story that didn't need embellishment because the truth already sounded like fiction. He kissed Laura's forehead as she stirred gently in her sleep and whispered, "You're incredible." In August, they threw a party for Emma's 10th birthday in the backyard. It wasn't extravagant, just colorful streamers, fold-out tables filled with treats, and a piñata shaped like a giant star. Emma insisted on inviting everyone from her class, along with her teacher, the school librarian, and the cafeteria lady who always gave her extra juice boxes. Victor rented a bounce house, despite the HOA's disapproval, and by noon there were children shrieking with joy, music playing, and even Mr. Buttons had a party hat. During the candle lighting, Emma stood proudly in front of her cake, holding Victor's hand on one side and Laura's on the other. When the singing ended, she didn't blow out the candles right away. She looked around at the gathered crowd, friends, neighbors, teachers, and said, "Last year, I wished that me and Mommy would find someone who would make us feel safe again. This year, I already got my wish. So, my new wish is for other kids who are scared to find someone like I did." Laura blinked back tears. Victor reached down and squeezed her hand, his voice catching in his throat. Emma leaned forward and blew out the candles. Everyone clapped. Later that night, long after the last guest had gone and Emma had collapsed on the couch in a sugar-fueled coma, Victor and Laura stood in the yard. The paper lanterns still glowed faintly above their heads, casting flickering shadows. "She's so brave," Laura said quietly. "She gets it from you." Laura leaned into him. I get it from her. Victor kissed her gently, feeling the pulse of this life, this moment. Everything he'd once chased, numbers, dominance, legacy, had led him here, and here was enough. 2 weeks later, as Emma prepared for her first day of 5th grade, Victor found himself packing her lunch with little notes scribbled in his unmistakable handwriting. Remember, you're smarter than any quiz. P.S. Tell Mr. Buttons not to eat the pudding. Emma giggled every time. The night before school began, they sat on the front porch, watching the sun set in streaks of pink and lavender. "Are you nervous?" Victor asked. Emma shrugged. "A little, but mostly excited. I have my new backpack, and my dad's picking me up after." Victor looked over at her. "Every time." She smiled, leaning against his arm. "Promise?" He nodded. "Forever." The weeks rolled on. Victor started writing again, too, this time not business plans or keynote addresses. Personal letters to Emma, stories for her to read when she was older, stories about how he found her, about how she saved him as much as he saved her. He kept them in a leather-bound journal in his nightstand. Someday, when she was ready, she'd read them. Fall returned. The leaves turned. School photos were taken, and Halloween costumes were debated with the seriousness of political policy. Emma eventually decided to be a bear, Mr. Buttons's honorary bodyguard, she said. Victor wore a suit and tie and went as a serious businessman learning to have fun, much to Laura's amusement. One evening in October, Victor took them both out to dinner, just the three of them, no phones, no distractions. After dessert, he pulled a small envelope from his coat and slid it across the table to Laura. "What's this?" she asked. "Open it." Inside was a reservation confirmation, a weekend getaway at a cabin in the mountains just before the first snow. No internet, no meetings, just family. "I thought we could use a break," he said. Laura's eyes sparkled. "I love it." Emma clapped. "Can we bring Mr. B?" Victor grinned. "Of course, he's family." At the cabin, they built snowmen, drank cocoa, read books by the fire. Emma called it the best weekend of her life. On their last night, as the snow fell outside and the fireplace crackled, Victor took Laura's hand and whispered, "There's something I've been wanting to ask." Her heart skipped. "Yeah?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring, not flashy but beautiful, elegant, with an emerald set in a band etched with delicate stars. "Will you marry me?" Laura gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Emma squealed, "Yes, say yes." Laura looked at him, eyes glistening, voice shaking. "Yes, yes, of course." Victor slipped the ring on her finger. Emma launched herself at both of them in a hug that knocked the wine glasses over. They laughed. They kissed. Mr. Buttons tumbled off the couch in the chaos, but no one noticed. And outside the snow kept falling, soft, steady, like a world being gently remade. The wedding was quiet, intimate, nothing like the galas Victor had once hosted in his towering city halls. There were no massive floral installations or strings of celebrity guests flown in from private islands. Instead, it was held in their backyard, beneath the arbor Laura had planted roses around during their first spring together. The arch was now thick with soft pink blooms, the scent weaving into the warm June air. Emma designed the invitations herself, each one hand-drawn and individually colored, and the guest list included exactly 42 people. Family they'd made along the way, not necessarily by blood, but by love. Victor wore a tailored suit in a soft slate blue, nothing too flashy, though Emma made sure to pin a glittering gold star to his lapel, so everyone knows he's a hero. Laura's dress was simple, a sleeveless ivory gown that caught the light and made her look like she'd stepped straight out of one of Emma's bedtime fairy tales. Emma wore a dress that matched Laura's and carried a tiny bouquet of daisies and baby's breath. Mr. Buttons was seated front row, a small tie clipped around his neck and a boutonniere taped to his paw. The ceremony was short. The vows were not. Victor's voice didn't shake, not once. as he said words he'd written in the margins of boardroom papers and journal entries over the last year. I used to think my life ended when I lost my family. Then one day, I met a little girl selling a teddy bear, and I realized maybe that was when my real life began. I didn't find you by accident. I found you because my heart needed you both. I promised to love, protect, and choose you every single day. Laura's vows were softer, but just as strong. I thought I'd always be fighting for survival. Then I met someone who saw me not as a charity case, but as a partner. Someone who loved my daughter like his own before he ever had a reason to. I never imagined I'd stand here, but now that I am, I can't imagine standing anywhere else. Emma stood between them, holding both their hands, grinning so wide her cheeks ached. When the officiant asked who gave this woman's hand in marriage, she shouted, "I do." Laughter rippled through the yard. When Victor kissed Laura, it wasn't the kind of kiss that came from relief or triumph. It was a promise, deeply made, never rushed. Emma clapped so hard she dropped her bouquet. The reception was just as perfect. Neighbors brought food. The school librarian gave a toast that made everyone cry. Garrett Crane sent a wedding present, a waffle maker shaped like dollar signs, and a card that simply said, "You win. Best investment ever." Victor laughed for a full minute when he opened it. They danced under strings of lights, barefoot in the grass, the music floating on the summer breeze. Emma climbed onto Victor's shoes and insisted on dancing with him like they did in old movies. Laura watched from a few feet away, tears in her eyes, one hand resting over her heart. When the sun dipped low and the lanterns began to flicker to life, Victor looked around at the home they had made. Not the house, the home. Built not from brick or wood or carefully laid tile, but from healing and laughter and the quiet resilience of people who refused to give up on one another. Later, after the guests had gone and the yard was quiet again, Laura leaned against the doorframe, barefoot, the skirt of her dress trailing just a little in the dewy grass. "We did it," she whispered. Victor pulled her in. "We did." They stood like that, forehead to forehead, swaying gently as the last song played on a phone speaker somewhere inside. And upstairs, Emma was fast asleep in her bed, Mr. Buttons nestled in her arms, a contented smile on her face as if she too was dreaming of forever. The weeks that followed were filled with new joys. The title husband came naturally to Victor. So did Dad. They took a short honeymoon, not to Paris or Rome, but to a lakeside cabin where Emma could fish off the dock and Victor could burn marshmallows over a fire pit. They laughed more than they slept. They cooked meals together. They told ghost stories that weren't scary. They found magic in the ordinary. Victor's old colleagues started noticing he wasn't returning emails on weekends anymore. His publicist quietly updated his bio on the Langtech website to include family man. No one questioned it. Those who knew him best had seen the change coming from the moment Emma stepped into his life. Autumn came again. One morning, Emma came to breakfast clutching a form. "School wants us to do a family tree," she said. "Can we fill it out together?" Victor folded the paper open. There were branches and boxes, blank lines for names and photos. "You can put anyone on here," he said. "Doesn't have to be blood, just people who made you feel like you belong." Emma grinned. "So you and Mom, and Mr. Buttons, and Mrs. Winters, and maybe that one guy from the bookstore who always saves the last copy of my comics." Victor chuckled. "That sounds about right." They sat at the table for an hour, sketching out names and taping in pictures, gluing leaves cut from construction paper. Laura joined them halfway through, laughing as Emma debated whether to list a Garrett under weird uncle or honorary investor. When they finished, Emma looked at it proudly. "This is my tree. It's not big, but it's strong." Victor nodded. "That's all that matters." Later that day, as he stood in the hallway, watching Laura braid Emma's hair for school, Victor felt a peace he never believed he'd feel again, a wholeness. He'd been a man who once tried to fill the cracks in his life with concrete and ambition. Now he had filled them with people, with laughter, with love. The girl who had once tried to sell her teddy bear to save her home had unknowingly saved his life. And he had saved hers too, but not with money, with presence, with constancy. With love so simple and steady, it rewrote the definition entirely. As the front door opened and Emma skipped out into the morning, her backpack swinging and her voice calling out, "See you after school, Dad!" Victor stood in the doorway, the sunlight catching the corner of a family photo by the wall. He smiled, knowing that no matter what the day brought, one thing was certain. He was exactly where he was meant to be. Winter returned like a familiar visitor. Not quite unwelcome, but still catching everyone by surprise. The trees outside their home stood bare again, their branches dusted with frost. Snow gathered quietly along the windowsills. The streetlights flickered on earlier each day, casting long golden shadows across the living room where Emma now sat with Mr. Buttons, reading aloud from a chapter book with all the dramatic flair of a practiced storyteller. Victor sat on the couch nearby, watching her, half listening, half lost in thought. The fire in the hearth crackled softly. Laura was in the kitchen, preparing dinner while humming along to a quiet song from the radio. It was the kind of evening Victor never thought he'd have again. A perfect, ordinary night. The kind that wasn't captured in headlines or portfolios, but lived forever in memory. Emma turned a page. And then the bear told the dragon, "You don't have to be scary. You can be nice and still strong." Victor smiled. "Wise bear." Emma looked up. "I based him on Mr. B." I could tell. She returned to reading, snuggling deeper under her blanket. Her voice softened toward the end of the chapter, and by the last sentence her eyelids had drooped. Her words slurred into one another, and finally she gave in to sleep. Her head resting gently against a pillow, Mr. Buttons clutched against her chest. Victor rose quietly and carried her to her room, his movements practiced and gentle. He tucked her in, kissed her forehead, and paused a moment to simply take her in, this brave, tender child who had taught him more about courage and love than any adult ever could. In the kitchen, Laura handed him a cup of tea. She didn't speak right away. She didn't need to. They stood in silence for a few minutes, letting the warmth of the house and the smell of cinnamon fill the spaces between them. "She's writing a story about him now," Laura said finally. "Mr. Buttons. Says she wants to make it into a book for other kids." Victor smiled. "She's always creating something. She always feels safe now." Victor looked down at his tea. "That means everything." "It should," Laura replied, "because you gave her that." He looked at her. "You both gave it to me first." She reached out and placed her hand over his. "You were just waiting for someone to remind you what it felt like." The holidays came and went in a blur of matching pajamas, burnt cookies, school plays, and laughter that shook the walls. Emma had insisted they keep the tree up until at least mid-January. Laura and Victor pretended to protest, but neither made any serious effort to take it down. There was something about the twinkling lights and the sight of that tree, still standing tall in their living room covered in handmade ornaments, that felt like a monument to everything they'd survived. Victor hosted fewer meetings now. He took more calls from home. When his board asked why, he simply said, "Because my priorities have changed," and no one dared question him. His numbers were stronger than ever, his reputation untarnished. But the real shift, the thing his colleagues noticed most, was his tone. He no longer led with pressure. He led with presence. One afternoon in February, Victor brought Emma to the Lang Tech office for the first time. She wore a blazer over her dress and carried a clipboard, declaring herself Vice President of Take Your Kid to Work Day. She toured the departments, asked questions about everything from budget allocations to 3D printing, and ended up in the product design lab, where she promptly suggested a line of plush toys that could be programmed to tell bedtime stories in the voice of a parent. By the time they left, Victor had already tasked a team with prototyping it. "She's 10, he told his assistant afterward, and she just did what most people can't in 30 minutes. Marianne nodded. "You two really are alike." "God, I hope so," Victor said. In March, Laura received an invitation to speak on a panel at a women's leadership conference, her first major public engagement since starting at Langtech. The topic was resilience, reinvention, and the power of showing up. She hesitated for a day, unsure if she was ready to tell their story out loud. Victor listened to her concerns and said, "You don't have to do this for anyone but yourself, but if you do, people will be better for hearing it." She agreed. When the day came, Victor sat in the front row. Emma sat beside him, holding a homemade sign that read, "Go Mom," with glitter hearts drawn around the edges. Laura took the stage, and as she began speaking about the cold apartment, the bear, the man who stopped to listen, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. She wasn't speaking for sympathy. She was speaking from strength. When she stepped down, the standing ovation was immediate. Victor kissed her hand and whispered, "You are extraordinary." And Laura said, "We are." Spring bloomed again. The cherry trees in the backyard exploded in pink blossoms, and Emma turned 11. This time, she asked for just one thing, a family portrait. Victor hired a photographer, but Emma insisted the first photo be taken by Mr. Buttons, who was propped on a stool with a timer remote in his lap. The picture that came out slightly crooked, slightly blurry, but perfectly real, was the one they ended up framing. They hung it in the front hallway, Emma in the middle, Laura and Victor on either side, all of them laughing, caught mid-breath, mid-beat, mid-life. Victor looked at it every morning before leaving the house, and every night before turning in, he'd pass it again, the glow from the hallway light, landing just so across their faces. One evening, as they all curled up on the couch again, same as they had the year before, the seasons before, Victor pulled Emma close and said, "You remember the day we met?" Emma grinned sleepily. "When I sold Mr. B for way too much money?" "Exactly. I thought you were just a man who felt bad for me." Victor kissed her hair. "I felt a lot of things, but mostly I felt like I was meant to find you." "I felt that too," she whispered. Victor looked over at Laura, her legs stretched across the couch, her hand resting on his knee. Her smile was quiet, knowing. "I think," Laura said softly, "sometimes the universe puts broken things right in front of each other, because they're the only ones who know how to put each other back together." Victor nodded, and he knew without any doubt now that the little girl on the sidewalk hadn't just sold him a bear. She had given him a home, and he'd spend the rest of his life making sure she never had to sell anything again, not her joy, not her safety, not her dreams, because the family they'd built was no longer temporary or accidental or even extraordinary. It was just life now, messy, beautiful, real, and finally, completely theirs.